Hello and welcome to Writing in a Flash, Optimizing the Art of Flash Fiction. My name is Lisa Fox. Just to introduce myself here, I am a short fiction writer from New Jersey. I am a pharmaceutical market researcher by day. I've been writing flash fiction now for about the past 8 years or so. In fact, I had come back to writing after a 20-year hiatus with flash fiction in the NYC Midnight Flash Fiction Contest back in 2016, and it actually remains one of my favorite forms of writing. So I'm happy to walk you through today just some ideas that I have about flash fiction, things that have worked for me. Hopefully they can work for you and help you as well as you embark on your flash fiction journey. So in terms of our topics, we'll start off with what is flash fiction. I'll delve into how flash fiction is different than short stories because indeed it is its own art form. We'll talk about how to plan a flash fiction story and then just some points to ponder to create great flash fiction. So starting off to define flash fiction. So what flash fiction is? Flash fiction is a full story. It focuses on a pivotal moment, a situation, a circumstance, or a conflict within a character's life or journey. It is about one moment in time, one pivotal point in time. What it's not is actually a truncated version of a short story, novelette, or novel that's been cut to meet a specific word count. So you don't need to write an entire novel in 1,000 words. No one expects you to do that, and that is not flash fiction. As I mentioned, it is its own art form. It's unique, it's distinct from other types of storytelling, which is what makes it really fun to write. So there are different types or subgenres, if you will, of flash fiction stories. The drabble is 100-word or so flash fiction piece. Microfiction is about 300 words or less, give or take. Usually flash fiction is described as a story that's about 1,000 words or less. These are all pretty loose rules. A lot of it depends on the publication. A lot of it depends on the competition. Whoever's making the rules in terms of where you will produce your stories and where you will potentially publish them or submit them. Really important to understand what their definitions are as well. And again, the lengths do vary, usually up to 1,000 words. I've seen it up to 1,200, 1,250 as well. So what are the key differences between flash fiction and a short story? Starting off, as I mentioned, it is about length. So a short story generally is about 1,500 to 7,000 words, give or take, depending on the publication. It could be a little above 7,000, could be a little bit around 1,250 for a short story, even depending on the publication. But with flash fiction, you're pretty typically looking at 1,000 words or less, again, give or take. When it comes to world building, a short story gives you plenty of space. There's a lot of room for elaborate description. Really, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do in a short story, setting the stage, introducing the reader to where they are. When it comes to flash fiction, it's about really being quick, fast brushstrokes of the world, any necessary backstory. You're writing a little bit in shorthand, if you will, really just to get the reader in very, very quickly, ground them exactly where you are, who your characters are, what's the situation there. There's not a whole room for preamble. In terms of focus, a short story might include more than one point in time, so multiple beats. Whereas, as I mentioned, a flash fiction story is about that one pivotal moment for that particular character, that one point in time that really is that focus of that very tight story. And as you can imagine, when it comes to characters in a short story, you can have as many as you like, really depending on the length of the story. But with flash fiction, because it is about that pivotal moment, it is intended to be quick in, quick out. You're looking at about 3 characters or so maximum for flash fiction. Any more, and there's really not enough room to develop them. You still do need to have strong character development, but you just need to do so really quickly. In terms of the language of a short story, again, you do have liberty for much more detailed descriptions. This goes into what I mentioned about world building. And with flash fiction, you have to be concise. Every word counts. You want to be concise. You want to be witty. You can use beautiful language, but you must say more with less. It's the only way to really tell that story. And in terms of plot and resolution, Of course, a short story, you'll see the character experiencing a change from the journey. Usually there's a resolution achieved. Interesting with flash fiction, it's a little bit different, and you'll see people debate this in terms of what has to happen in a flash fiction story. But my personal opinion, and it is the opinion of one person here, is that the character themselves, they don't necessarily need to change per se. That's really hard to do based on one moment in time, based on a very quick flash into their lives. The resolution is needed. You still need stakes, still need conflict, you still need some sort of a resolution, but it might not tie up in as neat as a bow as you would expect it to in a short story. It's okay if your goal at the end of the day is to really just make your reader feel something, make your character experience something, and give them a sense of resolution for whatever it is, the conflict or the situation that they have been encountering. So little bit of a different nuance. And again, you'll find people have different opinions on that. But in my experience, in my opinion, the stories that I've written, the flash fiction pieces that I've written that I felt most strongly about, it is about the resolution, but they don't always have to change. So how do we write flash fiction? What's the process here? So as I mentioned, it is about a moment in time, one pivotal piece of a day in the life, whatever it is. You need to decide on what that moment is in the story. Think about your typical day. Lots of stuff happens in a typical day, but if you're telling a story about one point in your day, it is a moment. You don't have to talk about, I went and got a cup of coffee, I had some cereal, then I sat down at my computer, and then I had a meeting. No, if you're writing a story about the horrible meeting that you had that day, it is just about that meeting. Nobody needs to know what you put in your coffee that morning. You need to be able to describe what the story is about in a sentence or two. And for anyone who has ever participated in the NYC Midnight competitions, this is the dreaded log line. A lot of people will think of it later, but when you write a flash fiction story, actually any story, but especially a flash fiction story, sometimes it's good to start with that concise idea. What is this story about? If you can say it in 2 lines, you can tell it in 1,000 words. And then, of course, you need to identify who your key characters are. Sometimes secondary characters decide to pop up as you go along the way. You need to decide how important they are to that particular moment in time. If you get a character that you absolutely love, but they're not moving that story forward, hang on to them for another day. You can always write another flash fiction story about a side character who didn't make it into your first story. You need to start in the moment, and this is what I like to call avoiding throat clearing. I think as writers, when we start a story, sometimes we need to ease our way in, and that's what I call throat clearing. A lot of times you'll write in a flash fiction story a couple of paragraphs that have to go away, simply because it didn't start in the moment. It started earlier. The story started earlier than it should have. And that's where revision comes into play too. It's okay to put your first draft down where you are kind of throat clearing a little bit. But when you really look at refining and revising, you want to make sure that you are starting in that key moment. And even in terms of first drafts, the idea of really keeping it tight, if you're looking at 1,000 word story, you do not want to go longer than about 1750. I try to keep it to 1,200 or so when I'm writing a flash fiction piece as my first draft, just because there is a lot of cutting. If you go over 1750 or so, which is almost half the length of double the length of the flash fiction piece, it might be too big a story to fit into flash, because that is something to really consider. Is the story Does the story fit into 1,000 words, or are you trying to shoehorn a much larger story in? And that's where I mentioned earlier, just that idea of the difference between a short story and a flash fiction piece. When you're editing, as I mentioned, you may need to kill some characters who don't serve that story's purpose. If you are longer than 1750, you can probably find the moment somewhere in there and save the rest of it for another day. Save it for another flash fiction piece. Save it for a microfiction story. Save it for a short story. Heck, save it for a novel. But hang on to those pieces. They just may not fit into your flash fiction story. And then again, as part of the editing process, it's about cutting any extraneous words and descriptions that just don't fit. And this part can be very, very hard because we love our darlings, as we should. But in a flash fiction piece, we really just need to be ruthless editors, and certainly any beta readers that we bring on board, let them really help you identify what's most critical and what belongs in the piece and what words. You'd be amazed at how many words you can cut out, if you just look at it from that, with that intent in mind. So one of the ways I like to think about flash fiction is remember the time. So everybody has their stories in life, right? Everybody can be a storyteller. So if you start with remember the time when, and here are just some examples that can help you form a flash fiction piece. So remember the time when the dog jumped into the pool to save that boy who was drowning. Remember the time when Uncle Tommy decided to play Santa and got stuck in the chimney, and Grandpa decided it was a good time to light the fireplace. Remember the time when we met that famous actor on a flight and he insisted the flight attendants kick us off the plane because we asked him for his autograph. Remember the time when Mom and Dad met for the very first time on an elevator and the entire city experienced a blackout when they were between the 32nd and 34th floors. Remember the time when the car broke down on the New Jersey Turnpike in the middle of a massive heat wave and that really nice truck driver picked us up and drove us off to wherever. Again, moments in time, things to think about. Even none of these are examples from my own life, of course, but if you think about it from that perspective, you can even draw on your own personal experiences, the time when X happened, to formulate ideas for a flash fiction piece. So how do you translate that? How do you bring that glimmer of an idea to life? So going back to those remember the time moments and thinking about that 1 to 2 sentence synopsis that comes to mind, which can really help you focus your flash fiction piece. So if we start with, remember the time when the dog jumped into the pool to save that boy who was drowning, you can summarize that and create it into a story. During a summer barbecue, a blind golden retriever saves the life of a drowning boy. Okay, so one moment in time, one pivotal moment in time for the dog, for the child, for the parent. And that's where things start to evolve. Whose perspective are you going to write it from? You could write it from the dog's perspective if you wanted to. You can write it from the boy's perspective. Whatever that looks like, that's really where your springboard is. And that's also where you start to decide who your characters are. Remember the time when Uncle Tommy got stuck in the chimney playing Santa and Grandpa lit the fireplace? So a childhood tragedy leads a man to hate Christmas. Can he ever find the magic again to bring a holiday joy to his own children? So again, a moment in time, some pivotal experience that's driving the character. Do you write from the man's perspective? Do you write from the child's perspective? Do you write from the ghost of Uncle Tommy? You could do that as well. So many different ways you can address that. So remember the time we met that famous actor on a flight and he asked the flight attendant to remove us when we asked for his autograph. So a pompous actor dismisses 2 sisters in a demeaning way while on a flight to Europe. Little does he know they are Instagram influencers. So what wonderful and horrible things they can do to this pompous actor. Remember the time when Mom and Dad met for the very first time on an elevator and the entire city experienced a blackout when they were between the 32nd and 34th floors. So maybe it's a lonely old man sitting in the dark during a blackout, ruminating on the day he met his late wife. Maybe it's a ghost story. Maybe it's a love story. Could be anything. Remember when the car broke down on the New Jersey Turnpike in the middle of a massive heat wave and that really nice truck driver picked us up and drove us to... So when their family accepts a ride from a friendly stranger, a teenage boy's wit is the only thing that can save them from a killer. So do you write from the boy's perspective? Do you write from the truck driver's perspective? Do you write from the car's perspective? There's so many different ways you can take this. But again, just that focus on one point in time can take you so many different places. And that's also how prompts can work too. When you get, if you're writing for a competition, for instance, and you have a couple prompts that go together, it's really about seeing how they fit, what puzzle pieces come into play there, and certainly how to distill that to an event, a point in time, something meaningful, something memorable. Okay. So once you've crafted a flash fiction story, just some points to ponder here. Always important to ask, is your flash fiction piece truly a story? You can write a vignette, but that's not really a story. all the elements of an actual story still need to come into place in flash fiction, even though it's a quick story. Even if you're writing 100-word story, it still has to be a story. It still has to have characters. It still has to have conflict. You still have to have high enough stakes for your reader to care. And you still need to come to some sort of resolution, whatever that resolution might be. Again, that ever important question, can the story be told in 1,000 words or less, or whatever that flash fiction word count actually calls for? Or are you writing a bigger piece? And if you are, that's okay, but you need to recognize it as such. And if you do have a deadline for a flash fiction piece, it's probably a good idea to go back to the drawing board. Have you used language that paints a picture with large enough brushstrokes to ground the reader? So again, it's all about economy in words, economy in description. Still can use beautiful language, really wonderful turns of phrase, as long as they push the story forward. Those are some of the darlings that sometimes, unfortunately, do have to go away, but do not lose them. Write them down, save them for another day. And if we think of it in terms of brushstrokes, looking at broad brushstrokes to ground the reader, to set the stage, to set the tone, to set the setting. But then when it comes to emphasizing the details, it's about painting in the fine lines, because the details here are so important, and it's so important to be as concise and precise as possible. Always, always important. Have you made your reader feel something, especially in a very short space? It's a very difficult thing to do. But if you can have a reader walk away feeling something, thinking something, pondering something they wouldn't have already, looking at the world in a different way, you've done your job as a flash fiction writer. Certainly, if we read novels, we can go 300, 400, 500, 600 pages in before we feel something. We need to do this in 1,000 words in flash fiction. So it is more challenging, which is actually what makes it fun, but certainly a goal that you want to achieve. And then as a writer, have you personally felt something as a result of your creation? It's a lot harder to write a story with fewer words. And if you can walk away making somebody else feel something and making yourself feel something, making yourself think about things in a different way, make yourself feel good about, the work that you've done your job. You've done your job as a flash fiction writer. Okay, well, in the spirit of flash fiction, this presentation was also very concise, and I hope you took something away from it. I hope I helped. Again, this is one person's perspective. I do not claim to be an expert. I'm just somebody who really enjoys writing flash fiction, and I hope this will help you as you move forward in your flash fiction journey. And happy writing, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Take care.